purpose is to reintroduce people to the Australian Impressionists and to see them perhaps in a new way, to see that they weren't four artists all together all the time, but they befriended each other in different combinations. They weren't doing the same thing all the time. And of course, they had women friends, and they were supporting and encouraging the women artists as well. Women artists have been included in exhibitions in the past, but perhaps we've refined it because we're specialising in different subjects, and which enables us to bring out the women artists a bit more. Most important is that they weren't a school. They would artists working together in different combinations over different times. They never studied together. Some of them studied together at the NGV school. Streeton and Conda may have studied at the NGV school, but not with Roberts and McCubbin. And Jane Sutherland did study with Roberts and McCubbin at the NGV school. But if we want to call them anything, we call them the NGV school artists. Heidelberg is, as you know, very close to Egremont. But the house which Streeton got use of, and he and Conda camped at, and there's a 9x5 painting of it, with Roberts as well, that was at Egremont. It was the Mount Eagle estate. And so when they're working together, it's mostly at Egremont. And in fact, when Streeton and Conda are painting together, it's at Egremont. I'm quite happy with Australian Impressionists. They allowed themselves to be called Australian Impressionists with the 9x5 exhibition, and I think that that is a good title. In the catalogue, the book that goes with the exhibition, an important international scholar has argued the case for the use of the term Australian Impressionism. Well, I'd have to say all the 9x5s. And then there are special ones in the 9x5s. But if you turn around, and because I'm standing here, I'm looking at that painting there of Minnie Simpson. She was the niece of Robert's future wife. And look at the expression on her face. Look at the expression on the cat's face. Look at the bowl of milk. It's telling such a wonderful story about little Minnie Simpson and her cat. And I just love it because of that. And so beautifully painted. Robert's in London, and you can see it right at the beginning of the exhibition with his painting of a ship, side by side with NGV's painting of a ship. He was influenced by Manet, and this work is so much an influence by Manet, by Velasquez, and all the great artists.
I think the NGV has a very strong history of producing exhibitions around Australian Impressionism. I mean, this goes right back to Golden Summers in 1985. And these are many of our most loved works in the collection. So the challenge is always to think about how to return to those really loved and celebrated works, but still tell some new stories. And I think that's what we were trying to do here, was acknowledge the importance of these works and their place in everyone's collective love of Australian art, but at the same time to recontextualise them in some interesting ways. Well, Sophie, would you like to talk about some of that First Nations context?
Yeah, so that was, that all came out of a sort of conversation surrounding Australian Impressionism being so often framed as Australia's first school of national art. And so we really just wanted to problematise that notion within this, and also, as you said, frame it in its larger context. So we're acknowledging what came before and also what was happening at the same time as these Impressionists. To just sort of question it, really, just to sort of make us look a little bit closer when people describe Impressionism as sort of defining our national identity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think complicate is another good way of thinking about it. That, you know, that this is a movement which I think, because it involves so many of these heroic, much-loved, iconic works, it can be easy to simplify what those works mean. You know, when we've seen them be reproduced so many times, we've seen cheering around on 1,000 placemats, you know, and I think to look a little bit more deeply about that, you know, what that idea of that this is the making of Australian art, which has been reiterated in a lot of discussion, not so much recently, but in the past, that was very much the central narrative. And I think looking more deeply at who was already here and who was already making art is really, really important.
Yeah.
I could do any number, but for me, if I was going to steal one and put it on the wall, it would probably be Conda's Hot Wind, which is actually just to my left there.
The one there with the snake?
With the snake and the femme fatale. I love a bit of symbolism, and to me that's a really exciting painting because it's a different facet of modernity. I mean, in terms of its technique, there's elements of Impressionism in it. It probably relates more closely to the symbolist movement, which had such a moment around the turn of the century. But I love that idea of the figure of the femme fatale being associated with the spectre of drought, and this is all about changing gender politics at the fin de siècle, and the idea of women suddenly having new power, new public presence. There's enormous conservative anxiety about this, and in response to this, we see a new fascination with these archetypes of female dominance, female power, female danger. And so I just think they're such wonderfully complicated images, but also really beautiful. And interestingly, even in the period, many women really love these images, and there's possibly a kind of identification with them. So yeah, I love Hot Wind.
I think that my favourite might be just Carrick's Flower Market. It's a little work. I spoke in front of it in the French Impressionism, the French Influence room, and to me, as soon as you walk into that room, it's so luminous and colourful.
By training, I'm a painting conservator. I restore paintings and do technical art history research. So that's sort of my job. In terms of this exhibition, it's been part of the planning process as well, with a lot of restoration. So I've been at the gallery for 23 years. So I've done 23 years, and I've actually spent 23 years working on pictures in this particular exhibition. So all the way through. To be honest, post-restoration, what you want to be able to do is put a paint back on the wall in an exhibition and know that you've allowed the original artistic intent of the artist to be shown again. And so you recover something. That's because over time things change, paintings age, or they get interfered with, especially historic paintings like this. And so you might have to go back and try and recover the original surface. Basically, I studied art. I did 5 years of art at Victorian College of the Arts, and then I realised I wanted to do conservation and study more about pictures. So
But what was it about conservation that drew you?
It was understanding the sort of more the technical side of things and really understanding paint layers. As a painter at the time, I was really interested in historical methods and things like that. And then once I got into the profession, I became obsessed. To be honest, it's an amazing thing to do, a very challenging thing to do. I guess my biggest contribution to the exhibition was the technical work on the pictures, which, as I mentioned, has actually happened over years and years. But I contribute to the planning, meetings and things like that, and helped selection and helped hang the exhibition as well. So, yeah. That's a good question. Not necessarily. I mean, of course, at the NGV we have very large conservation departments. We have the ability to do a lot of research and really care for things and look at framing issues and things like that. That's not necessarily the luxury of small institutions or private lenders, but it's really more, to be honest, it's sort of more the haphazard life of a painting, what's happened to it over time. It can be an accident, it could be malice interactions and things like that, and it can be things done with the best of intention but actually have detrimental effects visually to the work.
Can you give me one example of what you just said?
Yep.
Where someone is trying to care for a painting,
yep,
but inadvertently and ironically they're actually doing damage?
There's a good example behind us here. So this is Arthur Streeter's room, which is in the NGV's collection. So quite a few years ago now, I had to clean the painting. I had to remove a very discoloured varnish off the surface, and the varnish that was on the surface was Estopol, which is a floor-based material. So someone put it on, I think they probably put it on in sort of the 50s or 60s when Estopol first came out, and so they thought it was a new method and a new technology. It wouldn't have been a conservator, it would have been a private restorer or even maybe just even an artist or something like that. But it had a huge effect on the painting, and it took me over a year to remove it as a layer. So.
How do you remove a layer of estopol
Yeah.
from a painting this radiant
I know.
and not damage it yourself? How do you do it?
So this is where the role of conservation science gets involved. And so my training after I did art history was a science degree. And so we rely on a lot of scientific assistance and analysis to understand the material on the top. So you identify what the material is on top. And then you work out the chemistry of the original paint layer, and you try and exploit a difference between those two chemistries to find a way to cellulose the top layer and take it away. And it was almost impossible in this case to do it, but I did manage to do it by using solvents suspended in a gel formation, and then working very, very small layers, about sort of a centimetre or two at a time, under a microscope, slowly removed it. Huge job. So its only purpose is to bring things back together, reassess and re-look at different ways of understanding the works. And a big focus of this exhibition, which Anna Gray, the curator, is really drawn to, is the relationships between individuals. And so the relationships between artists and their interactions and how they work off each other and how that affects the work that they do. I mean, it is true. It's a historic term that was used a long, long time ago. Even in the lifetime of the artist, particularly Frederick McCubbin and his family were actually really frustrated by the use of that term, because they knew it wasn't. It starts in Box Hill, it could be the Box Hill School, but of course not everyone was there. So it really is about Australian Impressionism. That's really the term we sort of come to now, even though I think the idea of what people think about as true Impressionism isn't necessarily what we see here. It's more of a combination of different things, but they saw themselves and they identify themselves as an Impressionist. Well, for the women artists, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've really, NGV in particular, has been really focusing on acquiring some of these female participants in the Australian Impressionist movement. And like you say, some of them are almost forgotten in time. And one of my favourite works in the whole show is his array, and it's an amazing, sort of astonishing, and probably the most pure Impressionist work in the exhibition. So it's a fantastic thing. Yeah.
Young child?
Yeah, young child. That's right. Yeah. You gain so much more. To see the texture, to see the scale of things. The screen really removes scale. And so you can see really small works which are really powerful and big, ambitious works that are consciously sort of depictions of national pride and all that sort of stuff. And they're the things you pick up. But the most important thing is that thing about relationships. And so it's about seeing works from the same period, the same year, next to each other, and how people respond to them. We have visitors that come each week to look at one artwork. People can go and come in, they'll sit in front of the work and respond to it. It's quite a common occurrence. And so there's just something about the physicality and materiality of things which you cannot capture in any other way except to stand in front of an artwork. The original frame means a lot to the museum. We really want to show the artist's work in the frame that they personally desired as much as we can. And so we do a lot of work to do reproduction frames, where we recreate a frame, often based on photos and historical research, to show what the artist wanted to do. And so that can be ensued in private collections, because people don't have the resources to recreate that process. So this is one of our most recent acquisitions. It's also the title of the exhibition, so that's how much we love it. It's one of the 9x5s by Tom Roberts, and it's this lovely square format, and I just absolutely love it. And this is a she oak tree at Heidelberg, not before Heidelberg School, but I know that this tree was up on the hill out near Eaglemont. And they used to have picnics underneath there, so I love that work. It's a fascinating thing, I think. Beautiful, really beautiful as well. This is Arthur Street is the river, and it's gorgeous. It's painted in New South Wales, Hawkesbury River in 1896, and it is a wonderful work. I mean, I must admit, it's a work I restored, so I have a personal attachment to it. But it's just something about the capturing of light and the reflection of the clouds in the water and the lush greenland. It's an extraordinary thing. And it's sort of stripped of all narrative. It's got no distractions of humans and things like that. So it's just a beautiful response to the landscape. I also have a real fascination and love for nocturnal pictures. And so we have David Daly's Moonrise, which really, truly is probably my favourite work in the NGV's Australian collection. It's a lovely and then also Clara Sutherland's Evening Song, which I think it's so wonderful, blue and rich, but it captures that lovely evening light. It's very, very delicate. It's actually not a work that people know a lot of it, but it holds up so well in this exhibition. I think it's just excellent. Yes, so Izzo Ray, you mentioned this before, young girl. This is an extraordinary thing. It's quite a recent acquisition. It came up for auction in Melbourne. I went and saw it during COVID, and my response to it to me was this sort of fascination. Like it's an amazing thing. The vividness of the colour, the incredibly modern contemporary method of painting, as I mentioned before, is quite distinct from some of the other works in this thing. And it's been a fascination for years, this one. Who is she? Why was she painted? We don't know. More research to do, historical research, and we'll find out one day.